Hi, Mick McQuaid here with a lecture that is a little bit more chaotic than usual. What I want to do is show you how messy the entity relationship diagramming process can be, and I'm going to show you some artifacts left over from the creation of an entity relationship diagram that's just 14 entities, so it's a fairly small diagram. I have I previously, before I became a professor, I did a lot of database programming and I created a lot of ERDs, none of which I was allowed to screenshot and save. And plus, I wasn't thinking about being a teacher, so it never occurred to me to want to save them for that purpose. So I don't have any big ERDs. They can run into the hundreds of entities. And also on this particular project, I didn't save a lot of the intermediate results. I only saved the final ERD. So there were a lot of paper ones on torn out notebook pages that are lost. But I'll give you a little bit of a flavor of the process and show you that it's not the simple going from first normal form to second normal form to third normal form that you might expect. A lot of the process is kind of, it's chaotic. And it starts in this case with a spreadsheet. So what you're looking at is a fragment of a spreadsheet of about 2,520 rows of entries about autobiographies written during the Victorian era. And these entries span from 1811 to 1878, and they are the result of the work of a scholar named Sean Grass, who went to the British Library and other libraries in the United Kingdom to find out about this craze that existed during the Victorian era of publishing your autobiography no matter who you were. So if you were a private in the army or the Duke of Wellington, you wrote an autobiography and published it and sold it and made money on it. So it was actually a profitable business, even for somebody. You can see on this example, Adventures of a Shipboy, that was published in various cities and sold by various booksellers. So this was an interesting thing for Victorian scholars, and Sean wanted to make an application out of this spreadsheet that we call, in the database world, we call a CRUD app. CRUD is CRUD. It stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete, and it is by far the most common way to manage databases is to create a CRUD app. And there are all kinds of systems for creating a CRUD app, but there's a lot of manual work in deciding what is going to go into the CRUD app. So we started with this spreadsheet that you're seeing a part of, and then we asked Sean to make a data dictionary. And so this data dictionary existed in various rough forms on torn out notebook paper, and this is the final one, where the first column of the spreadsheet was the abbreviations he used. So as he went through all these libraries, he developed a system of abbreviations that are contained in the spreadsheet. And here is his explanation of what that column meant. And some of these existed with more than one. So you could, for example, have a one that was D, comma F. And of course, some people who were illiterate wanted to do autobiographies, so they actually had somebody else author them. And they had different categories, and some people, like I mentioned, the Duke of Wellington, he had a number of categories as a celebrity, a so-called great man, a military man, and a political man. And he had ghost-written a number of autobiographies. Then, of course, there's the author, And the author column also sometimes has the life years of the author. So this is, you can imagine, is a non-atomic piece of information. It's more than one piece of information in a cell. The title, which was pretty much left alone. The publisher is usually a city followed by a colon, followed by the name of either a publisher or a printer. And we want to be able to distinguish between publishers and printers. And this goes on and on. There are, in particular, three columns. It mentions here columns 8 and 9, but there's also a column 10 that have masses of notes. And we want to parse out information from those, such as the number of volumes, the number of pages, the size of the edition, the format, whether it's quarto, octavo, duodecimo, or I don't even know if there's a Latin for 24mo. The publication agreement type, because it's significant that people made money on this, and so we want to know something about that, and so there are notes about that and amount of payment and so on, the sales of subsequent editions, profits and loss. All of this information is recorded for many of these. And then there are also some uncategorizable notes that we're just going to call notes. Okay, so after we got this data dictionary, we began investigating the elements of it, and we did some visualizations. So for example, here's a visualization of the use of different words to describe the writing. So autobiography, confession, diary, journal, letters and correspondence, and memoir. And of course, we discover from this that they were most commonly called memoirs up until the 1850s, and then they began to use the word autobiography. Well, autobiography appears previously, but it becomes the popular name for the writing in the 1850s. We examined the place names of the publication, which are overwhelmingly London. By the way, this is called a circle packing diagram, and I prefer it over a word cloud. So this could also be done as a word cloud, but there are problems, which I'll mention in a minute, with word clouds. So the most frequently occurring city was London. The second most is Edinburgh, followed by Dublin, Glasgow, Linfield, Manchester, Montreal. One of these is actually Oxford, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know the place. Oh, here's Oxford over here. And then we drilled down into the place names. So all the purple squares here are London. And then within London, we have the names of the publishers. So the most frequent publisher was John Murray. And this is just a screenshot, but in the original version, if you hover over a square, it gives the name of the publisher. And then here's a word cloud. And the problem with word clouds is that the size is determined by the height of the word, actually the x height of the word, which is the height of the lowercase letter x in the typeface, in the particular typeface. So you can see that, for example, this I is slightly larger than this I, meaning that the word in is slightly more frequent than life, but the length of the word gives the illusion that life appears more than in. So that's why I don't like word clouds that much. But this is a word cloud, and in the original, this is a screenshot of a word cloud. In the original, you can hover over any of these small words to see what they are. And this is a circular bar plot of the years of publication. So we start in 1811 and end in 1878, and we have a couple not published or never published, and a couple that, or more than a couple, that have no publication date. And then you can see that there are a number that have questionable publication dates. So we think that this is 1840, but we don't know. So then in the course of making the ERD, I developed a plan for making the ERD, and that plan involved what we were going to do with each column, and it's a messy plan based on what we know about things like partial dependencies and transitive dependencies that we know a priori, so we can go directly to third normal form, bypassing the. I should mention that the spreadsheet is not in first normal form by any definition, but we're going to immediately make it into third normal form by having appropriate entities and tables. And this goes on for several pages. And it mentions some of the rules, some of the programmatic rules. So we wrote scripts because it's 2,500 or over 2,500 books. We had to write scripts for some of these things. We found out. So myself and my student did not know anything about Victorian life writing. So, for example, we didn't know that the English Earls of Clarendon are all named Thomas Cranmer and are only identified by their Earl numbers. So author turns out not to be a good column for storing the information about people who are named. So we're going to have a named person's entity that will be linked to the author. And the year of publication, we want to preserve notations that are not numbers. So we can't make year an integer, which is unfortunate. And then these columns 8, 9, and 10 that have all these things that we want to extract are significant. And then we're already planning ahead for the application that will use this database. So we're thinking about the users of the application. So we need a user entity and a user role that is either an editor who has all the CRUD permissions, that is, they can create, read, update, and delete entries, and a scholar can just this should say read permissions only. So here's the ERD itself, and this ERD was generated by a system in PostgreSQL, the database package that we used for this. Every database package pretty much has something that will automatically create an ERD from the description of the table. So we type in a description of the tables, and it spits out an ERD. And the notation is a little bit different from the notation that I showed you. So I showed you a double line to indicate exactly one, and this one has a single line. And I showed you an open circle to indicate zero or many, and this has a dot instead. And it has some spurious information like whether or not this is visible and whether or not it's public. We don't really care about that. And then it has the name of the entity, and then you can see that this particular entity, the book, is a primary key and an integer. And the main entity you can see obviously is the book edition. So this is a particular book that Sean actually physically examined in the British Library or other libraries. And it has a concatenated key that consists of the book ID, the edition ID, the publisher ID, the title ID, and the format ID, because all these may vary from edition to edition. People, particularly John Murray, discovered books that sold well in their first edition, so he bought the rights to publish them in subsequent editions and did them in different formats. So, excuse me. Many of the details about the book are specific only to particular editions of the book. Sometimes they were published with illustrations, sometimes not. And the agreement is specific to a particular edition. The title is specific to a particular edition. The type is a particular edition. The subject is particular to an edition. And the format, octavo or quarto or whatever, is subject. The type of the book is actually different from the book type, and the subject is different from the book subject. So the book subject depends on the book ID and the subject ID. And then over here we have the named person. So this has, their nobility title, their life years, a person note, and then this informs the author, the translator, and the editor of the book. And then we have one that's not linked to any of the others, which is the users. Now, I should point out that every database has a description of the database that's also not linked to any of the other tables in an ERD, but exists nonetheless. So there are these other entities, like the tables themselves have a description that is an entity that contains all this information about the tables. So it's a table that has columns like table name, attribute name, a number of attributes, and so on. Lots of other information that's not explicitly shown in the ERD, but that will exist in the database. And when you type in your information into the database about to actually create the database, that information is automatically saved. That's not really directly visible to you as the user unless you explicitly want to see it. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so this was just a brief description of this ERD process. So there were many casually made ERDs on paper with pencil and erasures and crossing things out to get to this. The main thing here was getting to the idea that we weren't talking about books, we were talking about editions of books. And that emerged over a period of a few days of working on this and some back and forth with the Victorian scholar to understand how these books are published and sold. Okay, so your assignment, of course, is to normalize a simple database. You won't have 14 entities in your simple database. Your simple database will probably have a couple of entities. Although you can do more because you can understand more about the business than is told in the, or I should say the domain, than is told in the assignment description. And then you're going to do one for your own project. So you're going to create a project and normalize the database for that and create an entity relationship diagram for that. And that is going to be your work for this week, and there's plenty of it.